Hi, I'm Blair Kaplinger, your host for Business Intelligence, the way it should be. This is a quarterly Google Hangout where we talk about business intelligence, the way it is and the way it should be. It's brought to you by Zencos. Today, we're going to talk about visual analytics. Actually, Visual Analytics 101. We're going to do a primer for technical teams who are planning on integrating the visual analytics tool set into their SaaS environments. So we'll be joined today by Ben Zenick, COO of Zencos Consulting. Ben, welcome. Thanks for joining us and taking your time to share some information with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So let me just give you a brief overview quickly. He's going to cover some basic stuff. He's going to give you a definition of exactly what visual analytics is and the tools that are involved. He's going to talk about design and architectural considerations for technical teams that are thinking about integrating the product. And then he's going to talk about other technical considerations that any organization is going to have to keep in mind if they are going to use pretty much any data visualization software. So without any further ado, you know what? Let's get into this and let's start. So what the heck then is visual analytics? Can you give us an overview?
Sure. Thanks, Blair. So visual analytics is a software product from SaaS that actually integrates two major business intelligence functions these days, one being big data and the other being data visualization. So visual analytics allows organizations to quickly and easily report on data, perform analytics, and do visual data discovery against their data, against their large volumes of data. There's various capabilities of it, but essentially it is a in-memory database application that allows end users the ability to build reports, explore data, perform analytics, and publish reports to various tools at a very, very fast, lightning fast speed based on the in-memory database processing. One of the primary reasons that visualization is important from this perspective is that big data provides a problem, and that is, how do I analyze these sheer volumes of data that are being presented to me, and how do I consume it in a fashion that makes sense? And so visual analytics gives you the ability not only to get to the data quickly, but also the ability to visualize and analyze that data in a meaningful way.
So, are there any business advantages above and beyond that you can talk to us about?
Yeah, so visual analytics has kind of set off an interesting trend along with other data visualization techniques, and that is, who is the intended audience now for analytics and who can consume analytics? So when you look at the power of like a visual analytics tool and the benefits of it, it's really taking the traditional programming aspect of analytics and putting it into the hands of non-programming type users and more casual users that are using the web to perform analysis or just reporting. And so by taking analytics and providing it to a wider audience, businesses are able to now share information better, explore data better, and analyze data in a more meaningful way than they've been able to do in the past. And it doesn't take a web-based business user, a staff of report developers, to be able to get answers to questions that they might not have traditionally been able to get on their own. So through this nice web-based interface, they're able to not only get your standard type of what did we do type answers on their own, but what if we do something, how will that impact our business? So there's a lot of business value generated by good data visualization tools like visual analytics.
Wow, so I was reading an article the other day that said that the companies that are getting the most out of their big data and actually are being most effective with it are using some kind of data visualization product. Is that just part of the hype here, or do you find that to be true?
No, I definitely find it to be true. I think if you take advantage of a data visualization tool and you have the right infrastructure and you're taking advantage of the traditional capabilities that you have for things like business intelligence and data warehousing, then we are seeing that as a trend. It requires, for instance, less training to do more. So, companies are being able to do more with less, both from a training perspective, but also, as I mentioned, by putting these additional capabilities into the hands of a broader audience, it doesn't require people to be pulled off what their, quote, day jobs are to build reports and perform other analysis for business users. They now have the ability through these interfaces to do it on their own. And it's easy to use. So the ability to have the interactivity with these tools and the graphical interfaces are so easy to work with that, as opposed to some of the more traditional analytical tools, that you can get more of your employee base working with these tools, and it's much easier to identify trends and patterns in your data, and that kind of leads to that business value again, because you're getting to decisions, identifying potential issues, or identifying potential opportunities quicker.
Well, you know what? We're talking about visualization here, and so I know that we prepared some slides today. So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to let Ben share his screen so that he can take us through some slides here that will allow us to see some of the concepts and actually some screens. So Ben, can you go ahead and share your screen?
Yep. Do that. Share screen. So hopefully everybody can see a screen that I have up, and the title on the screen is VA Deployment Options. So before we kind of get into, the purpose of this particular hangout is not around visualization, but it's around visual analytics and how that can be how that can help facilitate visualization of big data. So to understand that, and this is where we sort of get into more of that primer and 101, is you need to understand what visual analytics is and what options you have for implementing visual analytics. So as you can see on the screen, there's three primary options for implementing visual analytics. You have non-distributed environments, which are essentially single instance environments. You have distributed environments, which are more of a cluster type environment, where you have multiple servers performing tasks of storing data and processing data so that you can distribute workload across those servers. And then you have what's referred to as a cloud implementation, which I'm sure everybody knows about clouds now. Both from a public and private perspective, you have the ability to deploy visual analytics. SaaS's hosting facility supports a cloud deployment of visual analytics. You can also implement visual analytics in cloud environments such as AWS.
So can you share or talk to us a little bit about the tool set and how they work together?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of components to visual analytics, but the components are to facilitate various activities and various roles that you may have within your organization. So each role, in this example where we've got our roles defined, there are sort of four primary roles, I believe, when it comes to dealing with visual analytics. You have an analyst, you have report designers, you have IT and data administrators, and then you have executives or standard report consumers. And so each one of the tools going down the left-hand side has alignment into one or many of these various roles. And so in order for us to understand the roles a little bit better, let's talk about the key functions of these different tools, and maybe even look at some images and screenshots of implementations we've done using visual analytics and how it applies to these roles. So as I mentioned, each of the kind of components that we looked at before, although there's many components, they fall into some standard categories and key functions. There's the hub, which we'll take a look at. There's the concept of preparing and loading data to be used with visual analytics. The important point here is data for visual analytics does not live in a database, does not live on disk. So data for visual analytics is loaded up into, and we'll talk about this term a little bit later, what's referred to as the laser server, which is an in-memory database provided by SAS. So you have to prepare the data and load the data into laser to make it accessible by users and consumers of visual analytics. You need to be able to, another function is exploring the data, build it from both a data exploration and analytics perspective, but also just from the perspective of building and consuming reports. And then one of the last features that we'll talk and look at is mobile and Microsoft Office integration. So let's start with looking at some screenshots around these different functional areas. So this is what's referred to as the hub. Essentially, it's the default view for all users. The screenshot is displaying all the functionality available from Visual Analytics, which in this case aligns closest to the analyst's role, with the exception of what's referred to as the manage environment action over here. So all the common activities on the right-hand side are available and managed through the various roles in SAS's metadata server. And the hub is essentially providing you the ability to get to all of these different actions, as well as look at what are my recent reports or explorations I've done. You can mark favorites, and then you can manage other content within the environment. So let's talk about first, how do you, as a end user or even as somebody that's managing the environment, get data into Visual Analytics? So Visual Analytics requires the data to be loaded into memory. There's two ways to do that. One is through the Environment Manager, which is the top screenshot here, where you can select a table that's registered in SAS metadata and load that into Visual Analytics laser server through a basically point-and-click environment. The other option is the ability to prepare data. So prepare data allows you to take one or many tables, define criteria for joining those tables, whether it's a where clause, join criteria, what columns you want as your output, relabeling column names, and so forth. And then as you prepare the data and come up with this criteria for putting data together, you can also then load that data into Visual Analytics. This data, the code for doing that can also be recorded and stored off so that you can use it in batch or other interactive processing that you might be doing from other tools like Enterprise Guide or from a scheduler. So that it doesn't have to be done through these interfaces in terms of loading the data into Laser, but this is a good place to start to formulate and generate code to load data into the Laser server. So once the data is loaded, there's a lot of capabilities we have. We have the ability to explore data. The data explorations allow us to do analysis based on auto charting features, which the tool decides which are the best components from a graphical perspective or a visualization perspective to display the data.
Ben, can I interrupt you for a moment there? So
yes, please.
I assume that special glasses are not required and that you have blurred the data in some of these screens to protect the innocent. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the data has been blurred. You do not need special decoder glasses to use Visual Analytics. But the key is even with this blurred screen, you can get an idea here of visually what's occurring. In terms of a word cloud, it's actually using the categorical data along with a couple measures to quickly identify trends based on the size and color of a word. So a trend will stick out really evidently based on the size and color and the criteria that you define for your measures. Other nice options of exploring data are things like heat maps, where you can also quickly identify trends, drill into those trends to different levels of your data to see how do the various factors apply in terms of the correlation of measures. So what is the correlation, for instance, of cost on revenue, or if you're talking about potentially web traffic, what is the correlation of total impressions that you may be generating based on clicks. So the idea of the exploratory analysis is to be able to explore the data to the point where you want to do analytics and perform analytical functions on it because you've identified potential trends. So if you're talking about doing that, you can take your exploratory analysis to the next level with Visual Analytics and actually perform some analytics. In this case, we'll look at forecasting. You can create your standard trend lines and on the fly as an end user perform a forecast. Not only can you perform the forecast, you can then take it to the extent of performing what-if analysis. So what if the my costs increase by 10%, what impact would that have on my revenue over the next 6-12 months? So you can perform what-if analysis, you can perform scenario analysis. There's also other advanced analytics capabilities that are provided within visual analytics, like decision trees, correlation matrix. What is the relationship between two or more variables, box plots, and so forth. By just dragging and dropping and pointing and clicking, an end user can get a lot of value and perform analytics, but also the tool is going to interpret those analytics for you and provide information and feedback back based on those analytics. So this is, kind of tied to that analyst role. The analyst is also going to be responsible for building and delivering reports to your report consumers. These reports are an example of, you do some exploratory analysis, now you want to monitor something over time. So you can build some dashboards that allow you to monitor trends in your data, trends in your organization. And so these reports that we're looking at right now are built and then published and consumed over the web. So these are, consumed and integrated into, the report consumer role. So if you have report consumer or executive roles, this is something that you would see and probably only have access to as you look at visual analytics and you come into the hub. So when we talk about other visualization tools, Microsoft Excel could be used as a visualization tool. Now not only can you use visual analytics to consume large amounts of data and perform data visualization on big data, you can do it through the standard tools that you're used to, whether it's Microsoft Office or tablets. And so SAS has various apps for the tablets that they support. Those are identified on their support website. But there's apps, so you don't have to worry about particular sizing being off because it's not a browser-based report. It's actually a report that's being consumed on the mobile device, on the tablet or your phone through an app. So that's a great function that you have as an end user in terms of sizing, spacing, being able to use your standard tablet functionality and be able to report and consume on big data.
Wow. Hey, so Ben, what other skills or technology skills do IT teams need to have outside of course, SAS to do a successful integration?
Sure. So, I think it's great to be able to do all these visualizations and consume big data and, continue on a path of data visualization. The key, though, when it comes to visual analytics is it's not, it's not sort of your standard implementation of SAS. So you need to have a little bit more knowledge around your core operating system, hardware, software, functionality, and capabilities than you might traditionally need to know. But I would also say in terms of design and architecture considerations, there's nothing different from a standard process you might go through for any typical BI engagement in terms of thinking about how do I set up and implement visual analytics. Standard things that I would recommend you always go through are what is my data, understanding your data's intended use, as well as understanding how users and the types of users, going back to those roles, how are those users going to interact and interface with your data? What kind of visualizations are they going to need to do? And because if you understand that, that gets you to the point of having not only a successful implementation, but it leads into being able to know what you need to build in and have in place to support your VA infrastructure. So whether it's security from a data access perspective or security from a role perspective of what type of content you can have within visual analytics. Maybe it's software and storage. Some of the things that are important to note is, as I mentioned, the data needs to end up in memory. So how do you store the data to get it into memory? And then who has access, from a role perspective to load that data into memory? I think one of the other important things is because there is the need to get the data in the memory is to ensure that you have cross-training within your organization to support visual analytics, and not rely just on one person to support the entire user community, but ensure that multiple people understand how to perform the various functions that a role might be assigned to. And then, as you talk about software and storage, this does change a little bit, as I mentioned, because we're talking about in-memory now. And so your topology of your hardware and your architecture needs to take that into account as you're laying out a implementation plan for visual analytics. You need to make sure you have the appropriate SAN storage to lay the data down to then load that data into memory. You may need to start thinking about, and we'll talk about this in a moment, various Hadoop type distributions. You also need to take into account, if you're going to be implementing a disaster recovery or failover plan with visual analytics, how that would coincide with your SAN storage or your data architecture.
So are there any supporting technologies or expertise that customers are going to have to consider?
Yeah, I think it's going to be more important to understand some of the core operating system technology and components that you are going to be managing. So, how do I, from a Linux perspective, for instance, create groups? How do I create users? You need to make sure that you have a Linux administrator that's knowledgeable in, executing commands across multiple servers as you're implementing VA. Creating things like passwordless SSH keys is another key important feature that they'll need to understand how to do. So from a operating system perspective, you want to make sure that your implementation has the involvement of somebody that is an administrator on that particular OS and understands the technology well. The other items that you'll want to understand better is around data storage. And we're going to talk about storage here in a minute, but I want to first touch on memory and the in-memory requirements and laser. So I mentioned laser a couple times, and I believe I mentioned that it's SAS's in-memory implementation of their database. And what laser does is it stores all data necessary to be used within either visual analytics or SAS's high-performance analytics solution. It's really important to understand your data and the usage of that data in order to understand memory and the allocation of memory and spec out how much memory you need and how to allocate your memory to load your data into laser in order to fully take advantage of visual analytics. And you may get to the point where the only way for you to take advantage of it is to go with a more distributed environment approach. And that distributed environment approach ties me back to talking a little bit about data storage. So when you're looking at a distributed environment, you need to have the data stored in either Hadoop or a co-located database in order to load it into laser. Okay, SAS supports a couple variations of databases with visual analytics right now, and it's increasingly developing additional ones that can be supported by visual analytics and HPA. But it also provides its own Hadoop build based on HDFS in order to store data to load into SAS Visual Analytics. So what I have up here right now is just kind of a scenario or a comparison of Hadoop versus a co-located database or a database, and some of the benefits of one or the other or both. I think as you can see from a Hadoop perspective, going from Hadoop into laser has the fastest load time based on the way that it encounters and produces this memory mapping. It does, though, have a slower time than a database for first-time data access. So, the databases have a faster first-time data access, but if you look at the bottom bullet, it then has less efficient swapping because with the database, in order to get it into laser, you have to first write that data out to disk to pull it into memory. So you have, various capabilities, you have various benefits to each of these implementation options.
So, Ben, we're just about out of time here, so I want to thank you for all the information you've provided us today. It's been very, very helpful. So can you leave us with any parting thoughts? Yeah,
so I think regardless of visual analytics or any other implementation, The key is that it always comes back to making sure you have the right foundation in place. So although we have this push and this real critical need for data visualization based on the volumes of data that are being produced, you still need to think about what is your foundation. Do you have the right foundation in place or not to be able to do data visualization? And how does VA then fit into that foundation? The old adage still applies with data visualization: garbage in, garbage out. You may be able to see the garbage quicker and analyze the garbage faster, but if you don't ensure that you put the right foundations in place, it's still garbage.
Well, that's I hear what you're talking about. So, thanks everybody for joining us today. This has been really great. Thanks, Ben. And we posted a slide presentation for you. There are some slides, a lot more slides than you saw here today. And they're posted out there on Zencos.com in the resources section. And we want to really thank you for joining us. And that's business intelligence the way it should be. Ben?
Thanks, Blair, for everything today. I'm going to leave my contact information up in case anybody has any additional questions.